Imposter syndrome. It is incredibly common and it has a huge impact on us and really can hold us back in life. So, today I'm going to talk about the 7 signs that you have imposter syndrome, and I'm going to add in 3 or 4 signs that you actually don't have imposter syndrome. And I'll point you to what the problem might be if it's not actually imposter syndrome. If you're new to my channel, my name is Barbara Heffernan, and I've created this channel to help people worldwide live happier lives by rewiring what's going on in here and what's holding us back. And if you're interested in this topic, I am going to follow this up with some solutions to imposter syndrome, as well as a talk about imposter syndrome and role models, which is very important. And if you guys ask questions or pose comments, you might give me other ideas for videos on this topic. So if you're not subscribed to my channel and you're interested in this, please do subscribe and let's get going. So there's some research out there that shows that up to 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point, and that it can be particularly pervasive among high achievers. So let's take a quick minute to define imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is a fear of being exposed as a fraud despite all your accomplishments and despite evidence that you are competent and capable. So this syndrome is beyond occasional self-doubt. It's beyond when you're kind of learning a new topic and you don't feel sure about it. This is really about feeling like a fraud even when the evidence shows that you are very competent and capable. So let's talk about some signs that you have imposter syndrome. Number 1, you don't go for promotions or take on new projects because you're worried you're not capable, even though other people are encouraging you to do them. Number 2, you're always adding new degrees, new certifications, going for this training or that training to bolster your resume, bolster the, external evidence that you know what you're doing. Now, all of that stuff is great and continual learning. I'm a continual learner. I love it. So if you're doing it with a motivation of excitement and interest and you really want to do it, awesome. But if you keep adding those degrees or certifications because basically you don't feel good enough or you feel you need them to present as good enough when you actually don't, that's imposter syndrome. Number 3, you're a workaholic. You feel like you have to put in way more hours, or you just do put in way more hours than anybody else in your workplace. And again, it is driven by a feeling of kind of not being good enough, that it has to be perfect, which leads us to number 4, you have perfectionism. Now, perfectionism can have a number of roots. But when your perfectionism is driven by this fear of being found out, this fear that if it's not done exactly perfectly, people will know that you don't deserve your job or your title, they will know that you're a fraud, then that's part of imposter syndrome. Number 5 is procrastination. Now, procrastination might seem to be like the opposite of workaholism, but it probably is also tied to that feeling of perfectionism that you have to be perfect to prove that you know what you're doing. Now, again, you might procrastinate for different reasons, but if it is driven by that basic feeling of not good enough, it's part of imposter syndrome. Number 6 is that you have an internal critical voice that's telling you that you're a fake, that's telling you that you're really not good enough. It might tell you that these other people are just pretending to like you or pretending to think that you're competent. The internal voice might tell you that you just were lucky that you were in the right place at the right time. The internal voice will attribute your success to external factors or luck that is beyond the actual experience, right? That is ignoring your hard work and your contributions, right? So your internal voice really ignores how hard you try, how hard you work, how much you've achieved, and attributes it to other factors and tells you not to feel good about it. So that internal voice is probably telling you that you're a fake, you're a fraud, you don't really know what you're doing, and that one of these days you're going to be found out. So that internal voice is one of the biggest signs of imposter syndrome. And I also just want to say here, because I'm going to address when it's not imposter syndrome, that voice is the things that you really believe. Now, it doesn't mean that all of you believes it, right? We sometimes have 2 parts to ourselves. So we might have this sort of rational functional part that says, yeah, no, that's not true. I really worked hard to get that degree. And yes, maybe I had a little luck here or there, or I had some advantages that helped me to achieve this, but I worked really hard for this and I do know this stuff. So we might have that voice that knows that, but then we also have this voice like way back in the back of the head, like, yeah, no, that's really not true. And other people are going to find out. So this is different than just saying these things to downplay your achievements to other people, which we'll come to later. But this is really just downplaying them for yourself. And number 7 is a pervasive feeling of shame. Now, this really underlies imposter syndrome. And what I've found in my work with people is that people aren't always really aware of how much they feel shame, but shame is really a pervasive feeling of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good. I'm not smart. It's a labeling kind of feeling. It's very pervasive. It's not specific to a situation such as, well, I didn't study for that test very well, so I didn't actually do well on that test, but I know I can study some more. It's like, I'm stupid. So it's really a core feeling of shame. And that, unfortunately, underlies imposter syndrome. And whatever that pervasive negative belief is, it probably formed pretty early in life from experiences that may have actually been somewhat unrelated to you, although you might have really personalized them. So just a quick mention here of a free PDF that I have called Transform Your Negative Core Beliefs, because that's really what's underneath all of this stuff. And the link will be below this video to download that PDF if you are interested. Because knowing what your negative core belief is and then having a sense of where it came from can really help you start the journey of transforming that. And that's really what's needed. I am going to do a whole video on the solution to imposter syndrome, but really that's the core of it. Okay, so let's talk about the signs that you actually don't have imposter syndrome. So again, in my experience working with people, sometimes people feel like they have imposter syndrome when they have one of these 3 things going on. So I'm going to tell you the 3 signs that you actually don't have imposter syndrome, and it might help point you to the work you might need to do to get over that. So, sign number 1, you're actually a beginner. If you're in a new career or you're a student learning something new, when you're new to a career, first time in a new job, you always feel uncertain. People always feel a little bit anxious. Will I be able to perform well enough? What's going to happen? What will be expected of me? Do I have the right qualifications? And if that's sort of a temporary thing, I mean, maybe like 3 to 6 months in a new job, you might have that. Or you're moving into a new career and developing new skills, and then you're practicing them and you don't feel sure about them. That's really not imposter syndrome. That's really being a beginner. And if you can relax into that a little bit, like talk yourself through it, sort of coaching and calming yourself, like, it's okay. You're just learning this. It's okay to say, I don't know this yet, or I'm new here. But yes, you are going to feel a little bit like an imposter when you first take on a new role. And I'm going to cover that in a video I'm going to record right after this one about role models and role playing and how those impact imposter syndrome. So if you're a beginner, give yourself time, be patient with it. Now, you might be a beginner and have pervasive imposter syndrome, and you will know that based on the other things that you've done. So then it does apply. But if it's only because you're a beginner, it doesn't count. Okay, number 2, you're exaggerating your accomplishments. I mean, if we are not actually telling the truth, right, we are going to feel like a fraud. And if we're not telling the truth and we don't feel like a fraud, then we might actually have a little bit of a personality disorder, right? Like if we can lie without feeling like, ooh, I'm lying, not a good thing. So if you're new to being a writer, let's say, and you tell people, oh yeah, I'm a published writer, and you're actually not, then you might feel like a fraud, but it's not actually imposter syndrome. So then it might be required to look into, why do I feel like I have to over exaggerate my accomplishments, right? Or if you tell somebody that you have a graduate degree or you graduated from college and those things aren't true, that's not imposter syndrome. Now, working on being comfortable with who you are, where you are, that you can be successful without the graduate degree. You can be successful without having already published, right? You could say, I'm a writer and I work writing every day and I'm working on a novel and I haven't gotten published yet, but I'm going to get there. That's fine. It's the truth. And you can take on that identity without being a fraud. Hopefully this makes sense to you. Comment below if you have a question or a comment, or if you relate to the signs that you do have imposter syndrome, and let me know if you relate to the signs that you don't have imposter syndrome as well. Okay, third sign that you don't have imposter syndrome is that you are pretty confident in your capabilities and your achievements, and you do internally feel proud of yourself, but externally you always downplay it. Now, that's not imposter syndrome because you're actually feeling like you are capable and good, but you have been probably culturally trained not to brag. You might have grown up with a fear of shining bright. Someone said that to me on one of my lives, that she grew up in a family you were not allowed to shine bright. And so she became afraid that if she actually expressed how she felt about her accomplishments, that she'd be excluded from the social group. And I do think this is more common among women than men, but always these gender things are kind of like 80-20 rule, right? They can apply to everybody, and they can be very based in your culture, your society, and in your particular family. So sign number 6 that you do have imposter syndrome was the one about the internal voice, where you're saying things like, oh, it's all due to external factors, or oh, I was just lucky, or I had the right connections. If you are saying those things externally, but you don't actually feel them, then that's not imposter syndrome. Again, that's a fear of being perceived as somebody who's bragging or above others, and you may have been conditioned to put yourself down. So again, this is not an uncommon thing, but if you've been conditioned to downplay your achievements, that might be something to look into. How can you be balanced and acknowledge your achievements, your strengths, and your contributions to this world without crossing the line into being an obnoxious braggart, right? Because I do think that most people don't go to that point. Most of us can be proud of our accomplishments and celebrate them with the people that we love without being seen as braggarts. So those are the 3 signs that you don't actually have imposter syndrome. And I want to come back to why I think this is such an important topic. When I went through the signs that you might have imposter syndrome, a number of them are about holding yourself back or letting anxiety get the best of you, right? Your anxiety driving you to work too much, which impacts your health, can damage your relationships. And obviously anxiety and all the adrenaline and worry, that impacts your health and your relationships, right? And we all have gifts to bring to the world. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And right now, the world needs your gifts. The world truly needs you to embrace who you are, have authentic confidence, and let yourself shine bright. Your shining bright does not diminish anybody else. Now, authentic confidence is one of the things that we work on in my online program, and there's a link for that below as well. It's called Roadmap to Joy and Authentic Confidence. Moving to joy and authentic confidence takes time. So this is a 6-month program, but rewiring what's happening in here really does take some time, some effort, some guidance, but you can do it. So stay tuned for my next video on overcoming imposter syndrome and the one on role playing and role models. Talk to you later.